All right, Shalom. This is the brother Ra'aya coming in the spirit and the power of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. But before I get started, as always, I'm going to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai Bahasham Rakah Hagwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule and teach well, and whom I learned this truth from. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. Shalom. It's another Saturday, prophesying in this wicked kingdom, Babylon the Great, which the majority of these people out here know as the United States of America. Another change of scenery because I've got some Edomites with their baby in my usual spot, but hey, the word keeps going out. And last camp, I prophesied about how America is divided, its friends, its allies are turning against her, and it's eventually going to collapse, which we're in the stages of right now. But I'm just going to various topics and current events with this lesson, which the destruction of America going to intertwine in it, because this past week has been very action-packed. We've seen this situation go on with the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which you've got a lot of these experts out here saying it was an act of espionage and sabotage, which it clearly was. They didn't just blow up and leak by themselves. You've got Hurricane Ian, which has been tearing up Florida, which that's going to cause a whole host of different issues amongst a whole multitude of things taking place. Of course, the further implementation of this cashless digital society through these CBDCs, which are just one more stepping stone towards the mandatory implementation of the Charagma. The list goes on and on. We truly are living in some beautiful times. We're living in the end times of this current age or rulership of the heathen nations, chiefly of the biblical Edomites, who are known as these so-called white people, before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven under the true children of Israel, known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today. And with all this being the case, we should be in that spirit of just that fire in our spirit to be pushing this word as hard as we possibly can, having all 10 toes down in this truth, making our calling and election sure, because our salvation is nearer than when we believed. And on the phone. Bastard. But regardless, hey, these are the times we've been diligently waiting for. These are the times that we've been putting in this work to be saved from and ultimately receive salvation in. These are the times that our forefathers have been diligently looking forward to, the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven, where our people will no longer be under the subjection of the captivity of these heathen nations and will be sovereign again, ruling in the kingdom of heaven, under the new covenant with the laws, statutes, and commandments in us. But I'm going to start this lesson off with Luke chapter 10, verse 23. And he turned him unto his disciples, speaking of Yahweh Shai Hamashiach, whom this world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, and said privately, Blessed are the eyes which see the things that ye see. And he was speaking to his disciples in the past, telling them how blessed they were to see the first coming of the Messiah, the anointed, the Hamashiach. And they were truly blessed to live in the times of Yahweh Shai walking on the earth. But as pursuant to Romans chapter 15, everything written aforetime was written for our learning. Yahweh Shai is also speaking to his disciples today, whom are back in the reincarnation, doing the same thing they did in the past, being prophets, out on the highways and byways, preaching this word, as well as putting up these video epistles on the internet. They're blessed again, because we're going to see the second coming of Yahweh Shai Hamashiach and the downfall of this age of the heathen nations, this age of the Gentiles, which is coming to an end, and the ushering into the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the eyes which see the things that ye see, for I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which ye see and have not seen them, and to hear those things which ye hear and have not heard them. Again, back in the past, they were blessed to see the coming of the Hamashiach, which the prophets and the holy men and the kings before them were waiting on the coming of the Hamashiach. But the disciples are blessed today to see these things, which our forefathers in the past were waiting for, his second coming and the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. And we know that we're living in these times because all the end time signs that Yahawashi Hamashiach told his disciples to look for are either in the process of taking place or taking place as we speak. And now I'm going to jump to Matthew chapter 24. I'm going to start at verse 3 and jump around a bit. Again, Yahawashi is speaking to his disciples in the past, but really speaking to his disciples today who are living in these times he was talking about. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world, or the age of the rulership of the heathen nations? And back then, the apostles were living under the ancient pagan Roman Empire, those legs of iron in Daniel chapter 2, which was a nation that was also under the biblical Edomites. And the empire we're living in today is the extension of that. The last leg of the Roman Empire, those iron toes mixed with miry clay, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of, which just so happens to be under these Edomites again. This is their last rulership before they're completely taken out of power and will become a no people and will never rise up ever again and be our slaves in the kingdom of heaven, along with these other heathen nations. And Yahawashi answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Hamashiach, and shall deceive many. And we're seeing that on all levels. You've got some people in Israel, such as Comfy, that called himself the God-sent comforter, and you had a lot of people that followed after him. But what was his end? Hey, he's in the spirit world right now. You've got a bunch of these bug-out, either heathen Christians, like those Edomite Christians that dress up like Jesus and pretend like they're Jesus, or even people of our nation that do the same thing, going around and deceiving people, saying, look, I'm the coming of the Messiah. Look at what I'm doing. I'm this, that, and the other. And then on the other hand of that, you've got these Edomites out here, these elites, using their science and their technology to show themselves as the Hamashiach, or the anointed out here, trying to bring in this anti-Christ or anti-Hamashiach transhumanist NW0, their great reset, that fourth industrial revolution. And we can clearly see that these Edomites have deceived people with their technology out here and their wicked, wayward philosophies like evolution, atheism, feminism, democracy, you name it. As it says in Revelation chapter 13, he deceived the people in the sight of the beast with those miracles that he performed. For one instance, for calling fire down from heaven unto the ground, which goes to those 2 atomic bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima during World War II. That was literally fire that came down from the sky onto the ground and obliterated all those Ammonites or Japanese people, or a lot of them, in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And after that event happened, because what you have to remember is that was the first use of nuclear weapons, beginning with those atomic weapons. Nobody wanted any smoke from these Edomites in America, and they got in line up until this point. But now you've got these other heathen nations with their own nukes. As it says in Joel chapter 3 verse 9, let the weak say I am strong. A lot of these nations like North Korea, for instance, are bucking up and saying, look, you're not the big bad boy on the block anymore. You can't just push us around, because you know what? We got those nukes. We can turn that key and shoot them on you. And then of course you got the other big boys on the block like Russia and China talking that big shit too. But without straying too far off topic, these technological pseudoscientific miracles like the so-called health system that the Edomite puts up, cell phones, laptops, airplanes, cars. He's deceived the people of this earth by this technology. And then again, he pushes this atheistic, antichrist vibration out here to think that the Bible's a fairy tale and that this is the only life out here to live. So naturally, if you've been brainwashed by Esau's system out here and you think that this life is truly it, and you see this one nation or race of people with all this technology in a position of power, what would you naturally do? Look at them as the apex predator, the top of the food chain, the gods of the earth. But, hey, you Edomites, just like all these other heathen kingdoms, were set up by the Most High to rule for a time, to fulfill prophecy, and you've just about reached those bounds which you cannot pass. Hence, why your kingdom is collapsing globally on an economic level, on a moral level, militarily, the list goes on and on. But verse 6, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. And we can clearly see that there are wars taking place right now. What do you have? The war in Ukraine. You had the war in Afghanistan, the Syrian civil war, the Libyan civil war. You've got constant conflict going on between those Amalekite Edomites calling themselves Israelis over in the Holy Land right now with those Palestinian Arabs or Ishmaelites. And all these other brush fire wars taking place in Africa, in Central and South America, all across the planet. And rumors of wars, which there's a lot of that going on right now. China going to war against Taiwan, Israel going to war against Iran. Of course, we can't forget Russia going to war against the US and NATO, World War III, nuclear war, which all these things aren't going to be rumors for too much longer. They're going to become actual hot wars. And with this situation that's been going on with the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline over this past week, that's just going to further foment this third world war, because you got a lot of speculation going on right now on who did it, who committed this act of sabotage. You got some nations saying it was Russia, which when you look into the geopolitics and economics of it, it would not benefit Russia to destroy the Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia received a lot of revenue from Europe through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, and they were planning to do the same with Nord Stream 2. And the reason Russia has been restricting their flows to Europe is because they want to bring Europe back to the table to take sanctions off of them so, you know, business can get back to usual. So just on a common sense level, it wouldn't make sense for Russia to destroy those pipelines. But, and I believe it was the United States of America behind it, and the United States of America has every reason to sabotage those pipelines. They want to take Europe away from their economic and political ties with Russia and bring them further into their circle and get them from using Russian natural gas and oil and then to use gas and oil from the United States of America. And a video has surfaced that I believe came out in February of President Biden saying that, look, if Russia, and this was before Russia invaded Ukraine, if Russia invades Ukraine, we're going to disrupt the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And we can see that they did that when Russia invaded Ukraine. They bullied Germany into cutting off the Nord Stream 2 pipeline because it was in the process of being completed. And then now you've got this situation where there have been leaks from Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. So now Russia can no longer send gas to Europe, and Europe can no longer receive gas from Russia. And what's that going to lead to? Further problems in Russia with this, in Europe, with this energy crisis they've got going on right now, because due to them not receiving the normal amounts of natural gas and oil and other resources from Russia, they've been having to do energy rations, turning off lights at certain points of the day. Restaurants, a lot of restaurants are using candles now to save on power. And then in countries, I believe it's in Spain, I know it's in Spain for sure, and I believe in Greece as well, they're putting laws into place to where if people move their thermostat to on their ACs to a certain level, they could be fined for it, just trying to energy ration to save up stores for winter. But now that they're just completely not receiving any gas or natural resources from Russia, that's going to further expound upon the issue. And what's that going to ultimately lead to? America's European allies turning against her at some point during World War III and allying themselves with Russia to shoot 200 million nuclear missiles onto the US. Because like I went into a little bit in my last Saturday lesson, America's allies will turn against her, and this could be the perfect catalyst for it, or just another stepping stone to lead towards that eventuality. And you know what? Hey, we're living in the times of prophecy, and Yahawashi, the spirit of Yahawashi is the spirit of prophecy. So I'm just going to a few precepts to show, again, that America's allies are going to turn against her. And really, as it said back in Mark chapter 3, verses 24 to 25, if a kingdom be divided, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided, that house cannot stand. We can clearly see that these Edomites, not just in America, but globally, are divided. And situations like this are just going to further expound upon that division. And this kingdom's not going to stand and be completely broken apart and taken out of the way. And the next kingdom to come is going to be the kingdom of Yasharallah, the kingdom of Israel, under the children of Israel. But this is Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, the 10 horns is speaking of the EU, or European Union, beginning with the first 10 common markets of the EU, back when it was known as the European Economic Community. And the beast is speaking of NATO. These shall hate the whore that sitteth upon the beast, the United States of America, and that virgin daughter of Babylon, mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great, which when you read the first couple of verses of Revelation chapter 17, it's speaking of that whore Babylon. These shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. And that fire that they're going to burn her with are those 200 million nuclear missiles that are going to be fired onto this place, which is going to turn it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. Now I'm going to jump to the book of Obadiah, chapter 1. I'll start at verse 1 and then jump down to verse 7. The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom. And the book of Obadiah is dedicated to the nation of Esau Edom. Again, you self-proclaimed white people today, we have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Verse 7, which is more specifically dealing with the United States of America and her allies turning against her. All the men of thy confederacy, or your allies, have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee. And I believe I went into it a little bit during my last lesson, last Saturday. America's allies, these European Edomite nations that are at peace with America right now, have been deceiving them, because while they have been going along with the U.S. in putting sanctions on Russia and saying, look, we're not going to accept Russian natural gas and oil and cut our reliance on it, behind the scenes, a lot of them are still doing deals with Russia. And instead of getting that oil and gas through those pipelines, they have one nation that Russia sells those natural gas and resources to, put them on barges, and then those barges turn off their transponders so they can't be tracked and go into separate waters and unload them onto other barges or cargo ships, which bring them to Russia, bring them to Europe. So some of these nations are still doing deals with Russia behind the scenes because, yeah, they're saying they're trying to cut off reliance from Russian natural resources, but the European Union and these Western European nations are very heavily tied with Russia and receive a lot of those natural resources from them. So they can't just go cold turkey like that. And the fact that the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline as of now are out of commission is just going to further expound upon this division between the U.S. and her Western European allies and lead to those 10 horns upon the beast, hating that whore and eating her flesh and burning her with that nuclear fire. And prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee, receiving all this money from the U.S. to upkeep NATO and other aspects of their society, eventually laying that wound under them, completely just turning against them and allying themselves with nations like Russia and China, and then again to altogether shoot those nuclear missiles onto the United States of America. We are living in some highly prophetic and beautiful times that with that Luke chapter 10 that I opened up with, Yahushua said, "Blessed are the eyes which see these things, because many great kings and men and prophets have desired to see them and have not seen them." We truly are living in the end times before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. And before I go back to that Matthew chapter 24, I'm going to go to Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, verse... Let's see where I want to start. I'll start at verse 36. And this is dealing with the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar of the Neo-Babylonian Empire had, dealing with that statue of a man made with the different metals, gold, silver, brass, iron. And this is Daniel's interpretation of that dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. And what this statue dealt with were the kingdoms that would rule, the heathen kingdoms that would rule before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. Salakia. I guess that's about time to take a sip of water. But yeah, that vision is dealing with the kingdoms that the heathen kingdoms that would be ruling before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. And we have historical documents to show that those past kingdoms existed and ruled, and the next one came in succession of them. And now we're living in the final heathen kingdom to rule before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. But this is Daniel chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 36. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar. O king, thou, O king, art a king of kings. For the power of heaven have given thee a kingdom and strength and glory. Damn, bugs and ants everywhere. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, that he hath given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. The head of gold, the first part of that statue, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And gold is a very valuable metal, a very valuable precious metal, as we can see today. And what that symbolized was the opulence of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the riches that they had. And as each metal goes down, as you can see, it gets baser and baser, which deals with how each kingdom that came after the Neo-Babylonian Empire was of less opulence, less flashy than they were. And shit. Hey, and it goes down to the bottom of the list, which we're going to get into with these Edomites ruling, to iron, and iron mixed with miry clay, base metals representing a base people, because these Edomites are the basest nation of people on the face of the earth. Hence they get the basest metal. Verse 39, and after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And that kingdom that came after the Neo-Babylonian Empire was the chest and the arms of silver, speaking of the Medo-Persian Empire, which again, when you look into history, you can see that it was the Medo-Persian Empire that took down the Neo-Babylonians. And then that part of brass is going into the belly and the thighs of brass, the Edomite Greek empires, because the original Greeks were Japhetic peoples, these so-called Polynesian and East Islander peoples. But Esau Edom, beginning with Alexander the Greek of Macedonia, he moved into those lands and conquered them and subjected those people and pushed them out. And then, as these Edomites are wont to do, they took their heritage and their culture, and they started calling themselves the Greeks. And these Edomites have a history of doing that. They like to say that they're the true children of Israel, they're Americans, that they're the original Europeans. And then Paul Mooney made that joke about how these Edomites come out with these movies like The Last Samurai. And of course, the samurai were Ammonites. or so-called Japanese people. But who was the star of The Last Samurai? Tom Cruise. You had that movie with Brad Pitt called The Mexican, which, hey, Brad Pitt could very well be a Jake, an Israelite foreigner. That's open for debate. Then you had The Last of the Mohicans, which was dealing with Gad, or the so-called Native Americans. And who was the star of that movie? Daniel Day-Lewis, a so-called white man, which I'm on the fence with him as well, whether he's a Jake or not. But regardless, they get Edomites to play these historical characters in these historical movies. Look at that movie that Ridley Scott did, Gods and Kings. I think that's what it was, or yeah, Gods and Kings, or Gods of Egypt, dealing with the Exodus story. They got Christian Bale to play Moses, and they had Edomites playing the Egyptians and the Pharaohs, which all those people were dark-skinned people. The Israelites were, of course, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and the original Egyptians were Hamitic, Mizraim, which were one of the sons of Ham, who are also a dark-skinned people. And the Hamites are known today as these so-called Africans. But again, the thighs and the belly of brass was speaking of the Edomite Grecian empires. Alexander the Great, who took down the Persian Empire, took over their lands, and then he died, and then his kingdom was broken to his 4 generals, also Edomites. Seleucus, who got the land of Syria and the Holy Land and around that area. The Ptolemies, who got Egypt. Then you had Lysimachus, who I believe got Asia Minor, or Turkey and around that area. And Cassander, who had Greece and Macedon, those lands. His empire was divided into those 4 parts among his generals, Edomites and their Edomite subjects, calling themselves Greeks. Verse 40, and the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and subdue. Those legs of iron, speaking of the ancient pagan Roman Empire under the Edomites. And the original Romans were Japhites as well. But again, Esau came into their lands, overthrew them, and started calling himself the Romans. And when you think of Rome or Alexander the Great, what are the first images that come to your mind? So-called white people. These Edomites for the longest time liked to expound upon the greatness of Western civilization by the Greeks, saying, oh, it was so-called white people that brought civilization to the world, which really they just brought mayhem and madness and confusion to the world. But now that it's coming out that you so-called white people are the Edomites, you're trying to run away from that heritage. Oh, we weren't the Greeks, we weren't the Romans, we're Japhet, all that. But you can't run away from your identity anymore. You're the devil and Satan that the Bible speaks of, the basest of men, and you're going down. It's as simple as that. But just to back up that you didn't bring civilization to the world, you brought madness and mayhem to the world. This is First Maccabees in the Apocrypha, chapter 1. I'm going to start at verse 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip the Macedonian, speaking of Alexander the Greek, Alexander the so-called Great, as these historians like to refer to him as, who came out of the land of Kittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians, Darius III. And it was a famous battle at a river. I don't want to mess it up. I know the river started with the letter G, Galga something, but that's where he had a battle with Darius III, and Darius III actually fled away from him, and then that led to the collapse of his rulership, and Alexander the Great coming into power and taking over the Persian Empire and setting up his empire. Had smitten Darius III, king of the Persians and Medes, and he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, because like I just said, the original Greeks weren't Edomites, they were Japhetic people, But when Alexander and his people came into power, they were the first of their lineage of the Edomites to rule over Greece. And then they started calling themselves the Greeks, etc., etc. And made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. And there were about 5 or 6 in total, but the main ones were Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death, they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. So there's the birth of civilization. In the scriptures it says, when these Edomites came into power, evils were multiplied in the earth. Sodomy, just all these wicked things you see today, so-called women's rights, democracy, all this madness that just throws society upside down. And they go back to things that the Edomites were practicing when they were the Greeks and the Romans. And they fell because of those practices, just like this wicked society is going to fall for committing those very same practices. The only way to govern the earth is through the laws, statutes, and commandments of the scriptures. And you can clearly see that with every civilization that's ruled in the past, they didn't govern it by the scriptures. And where are they now? In the dustbin of history. Just like this current kingdom we're living in is going into the dustbin of history. But before I jump back to Daniel chapter 2, just to further, show that we're living in an Edomite rulership, and those legs of iron, the Romans were Edomites, and scholars do know this. This is a book I like to bring out called, it's a really good book too. Get this book sack open, the zipper's kind of jacked up. A book that came out in 1853 by William Beeston, who was a Cambridge scholar, an Edomite scholar, titled The Roman Empire, the Empire of the Edomites. And when you think of Rome, who comes to mind? So-called white people. When you think of Greeks, who comes to mind? So-called white people. When you watch movies like Troy, what actors do they have? Edomites. Gladiator, Edomites. Though, just like America today, Rome had a bunch of different nations in it. It was a very, it was a multi-racial society. But like today, who's it ruled under? Edomites. But this is on page 9 of this book. Unspeakable then must our astonishment be when we perceive that this grand secret was certainly discovered and disclosed more than 1200 years ago, that the true answer to the question, whence came the Romans, may have been returned and even registered in writing before the birth of Christ, that the response proceeded neither from Greek nor Roman, but from the despised Jew, that it has been preserved to us in the Jewish Targums, that it exists among the fables and impieties, the absurdities and the blasphemies of the Jewish Talmud, and that it may be comprehended in these 20 words: the Romans came from Esau, who is Edom, and Italy is Idumea, Rome, the Basra of the Hebrew prophets. Point blank period. And remember, this is by William Beeston, a Cambridge scholar, back in 1853. I'm gonna put this image in here so y'all can pause it, take a screenshot of it so you have it for your notes. It's on page 9 of, again, The Roman Empire, the Empire of the Edomite by William Beeston. Hey, the word's out on you Edomites, as it says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 to 4, till that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Who are you Edomites, you so-called white people? The wicked whom the Bible speaks of, the border of wickedness in Malachi 1 verse 4, and the wicked whom the earth has been given into the hands of in Job chapter 9 verse 24. And as it said in that first Maccabees, when Alexander's generals started reigning in their stead, evils were multiplied in the earth. So now with Edomites ruling the planet right now, what should you expect? Evils being multiplied in the earth, which we can clearly see. You just got some goofy fucking kids over there laughing. Shit. The man at least looked like a Northern Kingdom. His bitch looked like an Edomite. But hey, you people won't have much time to be laughing for too much longer, because society is literally collapsing all around us. And it's going to be a curse in that day to have a pretty girl like that, because nothing good is coming this way. Hey, especially for you women, but that's a topic for a whole nother lesson. So as I said, those who laugh now are going to cry later. There's going to be a lot of wailing and gnashing and gnashing of teeth in that day. But back to Daniel chapter 2, verse 4. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. And another thing, what were the Romans known for? Utilizing iron-made weaponry. And iron is stronger than brass, stronger than silver, and stronger than gold. So they were just completely able to run roughshod on the darker nations that they fought against, because they had stronger weapons, and they were very organized militarily. Just like these Edomites are very organized militarily today. What was one of their blessings as pursuant to Genesis 27? The sword, weaponry, which they've used to take the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above, which Alexander the Great used to take down the Medo-Persians, and which the Romans used to take down those nations in Europe and along the Mediterranean. They even had a legion in Rome called the Roman Legion. It was like the 4th Legio Iron or something like that. You can look it up. But and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Now we're coming into the current heathen rulership that we're living in right now, before the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven, which just happens to be under these Edomites, or so-called white people. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But that it shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And you can't mix iron and clay together, or else the whole thing's going to fall apart. So what that's talking about is how in these toes made of iron and clay, which is the last leg of the fourth beast, the last leg of iron, the continuation and the end of the ancient pagan Roman Empire, is this reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the US is a part of. And when you look at ancient Rome, while you had different countries in Rome, they all more or less considered themselves Romans and strove to speak Latin and follow after the Roman customs. But what do we see in this reincarnated Roman Empire? You've got the EU and NATO, which are allies, and they're not under that same banner like the ancient Romans were. You've got some people speaking French, English, Italian. They've got different laws here and there, but the only thing holding them together is that that military alliance and those economic ties of the European Union. And with that, they're partly strong and partly broken. And they have these nations called the Pigs nations, such as Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, which are known to be some of the weaker economic nations in the EU. And they're looked down upon because these other stronger nations, the parts of iron, like your Britons, your Frances, your Germany, are always having to bail them out. But also, with them being divided, a lot of these nations don't agree on a lot of issues. And like I was saying at the beginning of the lesson, with this whole Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline situation that's taken place, that's going to further lead to a division amongst these nations. Because as things get worse, with just even more natural gas and resources being cut off from Europe, what's that going to lead to? Political instability in those countries. People aren't going to be able to heat their homes during the winter. People are going to lose their jobs. People's businesses are going to go out, and people are going to start taking to the streets to protest and come against these governments, leading to civil unrest. And if and when more information comes out about this sabotage and that the U.S. was truly behind it, what's that going to do? Have these European nations looking at the U.S. sideways like, look, we're going through all this and you caused it? What do you think that's going to lead to? Them eventually, those 10 horns upon the beast, hating that whore and turning against her and allying themselves with nations like Russia and China to eat her flesh and burn her with that nuclear fire. See. That's pretty much it with that. I'm gonna jump to Daniel chapter 7. I'm gonna start at verse 19. Slacky, I'm gonna take a sip of water real quick. This is Daniel chapter 7, verse 19. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. That fourth beast, that fourth kingdom, those legs of iron, speaking of the ancient pagan Roman Empire, and what made it diverse from all the other kingdoms before it is that they had a Senate house where they had different senators in it who would come together and come up with laws to govern the society, much like the United States of America today. And then you had a consul and a proconsul, which were elected every year or every 2 years, and that was like your president and vice president today. And that was different from what the other heathen nations were doing at that time. It was a new thing in the earth. And that just further goes to show that those Romans back then were Edomites, because look at the United States of America today. They got the Senate and the Congress with senators and congressmen that go in and vote on different laws and stuff like that. And then they vote in the president and the vice president. Like it says in Romans chapter 8, the Spirit beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. The spirit of the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans beareth witness that they're the children of Israel. And the spirit of the wicked, the spirit of the Edomites, and all the different practices and ways that they live by, bear witness that they are the Edomites. Verse 20, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell. And this is speaking of that little horn which came up, the United States of America, really the main power center of the iron toes mixed with miry clay today. Because we can see these European nations, these NATO and EU nations, what do? They get their marching orders from the US, and even if it goes against their best interests, they follow Uncle Sam to a T. And where it says before whom 3 fell, that's speaking of the 3 major players in the new world before What was known as the 13 colonies back then became the United States of America you know today, which were Britain, France, and Spain. And America was in wars involved with these countries. Of course, you had the Revolutionary War between Britain and America. You had the Spanish-American War, and then you had something called the French-Indian War, which the British were involved in, fighting against them. And then also, how did America receive the middle part of the country through the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon Bonaparte, who sold off France's holdings in the United States of America to help pay for his wars in Europe. And of the other which came up, and before whom three fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And America does speak very great and proud things to these other countries out here. Like I was saying in my lesson last Saturday, these American Edomites are the proudest people on the earth. Oh, these are the colors that never run. America's never gonna go down. Nobody can fuck with us. All that. And then what does this country push? It pushes the alphabet lifestyle, beginning with LG onto the planet. It pushes democracy, feminism, capitalism. They go into other countries and overthrow their sovereign leaders and set up puppets so they can rape that nation of its resources. This is a very proud and demonic society. And when it said whose look was more stout than his fellows, when you go into that word stout, it means like pretty much stern, assertive, pretty much a bully. And it's saying his look was more stout than his fellows. And these American Edomites do bully around their allies. Again, this Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipeline situation. You had Biden say back in February that if Russia invades Ukraine, and we're going to cut off Nord Stream 2, which they bullied Europe, they bullied Germany into stopping their deal with Russia on the Nord Stream 2. Now you've got this situation taking place. And then whenever America goes to war with these different countries, their European allies always get dragged into it and always feel the blowback from it. Just look at the refugee crisis caused by Afghanistan, the Libyan civil war, and the Syrian civil war. Where did the majority of those refugees go to? Europe, further putting a burden on their system. And with Russia and with the US's proxy war or clandestine shadow war against Russia, who's going to receive the blowback from it? Mainly Europe, by not receiving natural gas and oil and other resources from Russia, and another refugee crisis, and just everything that's going to come from that conflict. Europe is going to be the main recipient of it. And again, that's ultimately going to lead to those 10 horns upon the beast, hating the whore and eating her flesh and burning her with fire. But now we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 24. I wasn't planning on hearkening or going into that side tangent for too long, but hey, the spirit goes where the spirit goes. But we just dealt with the wars and the rumors of wars. Now let's go back to Matthew chapter 24. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And as it says down in verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. We're just in the beginning stages of Jacob's trouble right now. The end won't truly come. World War III, nuclear war, won't truly come until the charagma in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18. The MARKOFTHEBEAST is mandatorily implemented, which is the RFID/NFC. MICROCHIPIMPLANT is mandatorily implemented. And we can see that with each passing day, we're getting closer and closer to the rollout and mandatory implementation of the charagma. You've got all these central banks in these different countries across the planet starting to institute CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, which is going to be the means of exchange, which is going to be the currency in this this great reset, the NW0 that they want to bring about, a digital cashless society. And what's going to be the means to use the Charagma? What's going to be the means to use the CBDC, the Charagma? You just have it in your hand and you want to pay for something, swipe your hand, or what? Get your forehead scanned. And they've got, what do they have now? Amazon One, I think that's what it's called, Amazon One, where it's completely, in some instances, completely cashierless stores where you can go in there and you just, of course you go through your phone right now to put in all your information, and I guess scan your fingerprints or something. But when you go in there, you can pay for it by just putting your hand over a scanner and it reads your biometrics. They're getting you people subconsciously and psychologically prepared to what? Have your hand scanned or your forehead scanned for when you get that Charagma. And then over in China, I know for a fact they've got completely cashierless stores where you go in there and every product has an RFID tag on it, and you just scan it with your phone and take the item, and then scan your phone at the kiosk and you pay for everything. Ooh, a little dry throat right now. And then with this situation that's been taking place over 2019 and 2020, what the situation 19ers will call it, what do we see? A push for social spacing and contactless payments. Now you've got a lot of these different stores where they've got self-checkout, to help slow the spread, so to speak. And then at the beginning of the situation, you had a lot of the authorities say that it can travel on money, so we need to take money out of circulation to stop the spread. And then you've got restaurants that have, a lot of them don't even have menus. You have to go and ask the waitress for a menu, but a lot of them just have QR codes that you scan to get the menu on your phone. They're just getting you people used to contactless digital payments. And then again, these different countries across the planet are starting to implement CBDCs. China has already instituted a Chinese yuan down in the West Indies, or the islands in the Caribbean. You've got something called the sand dollar, which is a digital currency. The EU is working on a digital euro. Russia has a digital ruble, and the US is working on a digital dollar. You had Executive Order 1406 or 1407, which deals with the government and the Federal Reserve putting the provisions in place to roll out a digital dollar, and it's supposed to be enacted on December 13th of this year. And then I was watching a guy called Homestead Preparedness. He's one of those prepper channels, and said at some time in January, or just in 2023, the U.S. government is further going to roll out a program which is going to institute a Chinese-style social credit score, which, if you look at what that is over in China, everybody's got a social credit score now. And if you do things like purchase foreign items from a country that China's not friends with, you jaywalk, you litter, you talk against the government, your social credit score lowers. So that means you're restricted from doing things in society, like getting a job you may want to get, using public transportation, leaving the country. And the US, along with all these other countries, are looking at instituting something similar to that, because China is nothing more than the canary in the coal mine for what these elites want to do with their NW0 on the rest of the planet. And that would be much more easily made much more easy to put into society with that Charagma. Everything, just think about it like this. You're in a digital cashless society. You've got that Charagma in your hand with all your funds, your biometrics, your banking information, your whole life on it. There's no more use of physical currency, so you can't hide money, and they have your own personal code on it, so they can just look up, oh, this charagma belongs to John Doe. Let's see what he does. Oh, this is the job he has. Wait a second. He's got a YouTube channel and he's talking against the government. Cut off his funds, lower his social credit score so he can't do things like buying or selling in society. And what does it say in Revelation chapter 13, verse 17? And that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the charagma, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Point blank, period. And then you've got another thing out here with this whole push for reducing carbon emissions and making a more climate-friendly society out here. And that's also going to be tied into the charagma. And I did a video a couple of days ago showing that the WEF, or the World Economic Forum, is working on linking digital currencies to carbon-related programs. And like I said in that video, just think about this. We're in a society, a cashless digital society, where you've got the charagma in you. And you're only given a certain amount of carbon credits for each day. So if you use too much gas, you eat too much meat, which they're trying to take meat out of circulation so people can eat bugs and whatnot. But let's say you eat too much meat, you travel too far, you do anything like that, they'll look up your an alert will go off at their database, and they'll see, oh, John Doe, he exceeded his carbon credits, so turn it off. So for the rest of that day, or however long your suspension period is, you won't be able to buy or sell or use your charagma until it rolls over to the next day, and you're at a fresh start, so to speak. And then again, with that social credit score, if you do things that are against what the government wants, they can lower your score and what? Lower your funds. But if you do things that make you a positive asset to society, what does that mean? You get a higher score, you get to do more in society, you get more privileges, and maybe your money becomes more valuable. This devil wants to put everybody on the grid to where you can't escape. And these are the times we're quickly coming into. But back in verse 7, for nation shall rise against nation. Hey, racial skirmishes taking place out here, and race wars and all that, as it just said, is scriptural. Nations rising against nation. And we can clearly see that in the United States of America, these racial tensions are boiling over. It's a small example, but just with this Little Mermaid movie that they're talking about coming out with, where they're going to replace Ariel with a so-called black woman, a Judite woman. You got a lot of these Edomites up in arms over that, saying, oh, they're taking away our culture and our heritage and all that shit. And Little Mermaid's a bullshit fucking Disney cartoon. And Disney's nothing but a bunch of pedophiles anyway. You heard the same thing with Batman, where they replaced Catwoman and Commissioner Gordon with Jakes. Then on another level, you've got this thing called the Great Replacement Theory, where these Edomites out here think that they're being replaced in society by people from third world countries and people of color. So a lot of these Edomites are on edge, and they're about to start lashing out more than they've already been lashing out. It's going to get worse than just Karens calling the cops on Jakes they see hanging out in a park or coming into an apartment complex, which is clearly where they live. They just want to start some trouble. And these Edomites are going to really start showing their horns and killing off a lot of you Jakes out here, gunning you down, running you over, all that. But on the flip side, the Most High is going to put the spirit on you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans as well, to lock horns with these Edomites out here and put them to death as well. And kingdom against kingdom, these major countries going against each other. Russia versus the US and NATO, China versus Taiwan, Israel versus Iran. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. And earthquakes are happening damn near daily all across the planet. Last week, or about 2 weeks ago, you had a major one in Indonesia. You had one in Mexico. And I believe you had one in California, or the one in Mexico may have led to some aftershocks in California. But all you got to do is just go onto Google and put in earthquake tracker and see that as we speak, earthquakes are taking place. And then pestilences. What has been taking place over the past couple of years? The situation 19 up in New York, they're saying that they're having new cases pop up of polio, which leads to paralysis. They've got another polio-related VIRUS out there. I can't remember the technical term, but it's like RV something, which they're saying is showing up in a lot of kids out here, and that can lead to paralysis as well. You've got monkeypox, the Curious George, which is kind of taking a back seat right now, but best believe it's got a much bigger part to play down the road. And then Marburg, which is another thing that's kind of behind the scenes, but with information that's coming out, it's looking like it's going to be a much bigger situation out here. And I can't go too much into it, but a lot of brothers have been covering videos out there showing that the jump shot, when the powers that be use that uno, dos, tres, cuatro, catorce, G, when they really start implementing that, it's gonna activate those sleeper cells in that jump shot, and a lot of people are gonna start bugging off and dying out here. And then what can they have to blame it on? Hey, the Mossberg, because it has a lot of similar symptoms to the situation 19. As it says in Revelation 12 verse 12, this devil, the elites of these Edomites, are about to come down in great wrath, because they know it that they have but a short time, and that involves killing off hundreds of millions, billions of people, and famines. And this is something I'm covering a lot. I cover a lot on my channel, is the food shortages that are already here and that are only going to intensify. You've got channels like the Canadian Prepper, Poplar Preparedness, and Southern Prepper 1, who do segments where they receive a lot of information from people, not just in America, but all across the planet, saying that, look, we're missing these certain items at our stores, prices are going up, etc., etc. And then you had, I always forget his first name, it's either David or William Beasley, who's the head of the UN Food Group, saying that in 2023, hey, expect famines, food shortages of biblical proportions, and that hundreds of millions of people across the planet right now are already on the verge of starvation. He said, we're dealing with a crisis on top of a crisis. And then what have we been seeing over the past couple of years? A lot of these different food processing plants across the planet, mysteriously burning down, getting hit by planes, or destroying, just taking that much more food processing and food out of circulation, leading to emptier and emptier store shelves and manufactured food shortages out here, famines. And Hurricane Ian, you had a major phosphate fertilizer company in Florida called Mosaic, which supplies 50% of phosphate fertilizers to America, and I believe about 10 to 20% of fertilizers globally. They've been taken out by Hurricane Ian, which is just going to further lead to an exacerbation of these food insecurity out here. And then you've already got U.S. farmers that are on the fritz right now, because adverse weather events like major floodings and mega droughts that haven't been seen in thousands of years are affecting their ability to cultivate and plant crops. And due to high diesel prices, they're not able to plant a sufficient amount of crops. So we can see it's a perfect storm of judgment and destruction coming to this planet. But again, these are the things that we've been diligently waiting for. Hey, as with that Luke chapter 10, I opened up the lesson with, Yahushua told his disciples, many great kings and prophets and men have desired to see these things which they did not see, but you have seen. These things must come to pass, as it said, see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. All these things must come to pass if we want the kingdom of heaven to be established. Many people are going to die. Many people you know, loved ones, friends, whatever, but we're not supposed to waver or get weak in these terrible times to come. Again, we should have all 10 toes down on this truth, pushing this word as hard as we can, making our calling and election sure, so that we can have that protective hedge over us during Jacob's trouble to save us from these great calamities that are coming. But I'm going to go into these famines a little bit, because the Most High is going to take out a lot of people on this planet through famines. And these elites and the higher-ups are going to use these food shortages and famines to further bring their ordo ab chaos, their order out of chaos. Because what did that devil Henry Kissinger say? If you want to control nations, you control oil. But if you want to control people, you control food. Food and starvation are one of the main motivators to get people to do what you want them to do out here. Just look at the account of Joseph during that famine in Egypt. You had that great famine for 7 years, and a lot of people, they used up all their money to buy the food that Joseph and Pharaoh had stored up for the good 7 years of plenty. And when they ran out of money, what did they do? They started selling their cattle. When they ran out of cattle, they started selling their lands. And when they ran out of everything they had, what did they eventually sell? Themselves as slaves to Pharaoh. So these famines and food shortages that are coming are going to be a major motivator to get you people out here to accept that charagma. You have the authorities come out and say, look, you accept this charagma, you can come to these FEMA centers to get food. And you accept this charagma, you can go to these stores to access food. You can become a part of society again. We've got the infrastructure set up. All you need to do is accept it. But I'm going to go to 2nd Esdras chapter 6, and then I'm going to jump to 2nd Esdras chapter 16. And suddenly, this is 2nd Esdras chapter 6, verse 22. And suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown. And what do farmers do? They sow crops into the earth. And like I just said, a lot of these farmers, especially in America, due to adverse weather events, haven't been able to sow their crops or cultivate a sufficient amount of crops into their lands, which is going to further lead to emptier store shelves. And also due to high diesel prices, they aren't able to plant a sufficient amount of crops. The full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. Your Walmarts, your Rouses, Kroger's, Publix, these storehouses being found empty because what? Farmers can't send their goods to these stores, and food processing plants have been destroyed, so they can't process that food to be sent to stores. Empty storage shelves, food shortages, famines, and already right now, you've got people in a desperate case stealing goods from these different stores. I did a video a couple of months ago showing that at some Walmarts, they have to put metal cages on steaks with sensors on it because people are just stealing those steaks. And these are when times are good. Imagine how much worse it's going to be when times are really bad out here. When an economic collapse takes place, you've got a cost of living crisis where people can't afford fuel, gasoline, and food, so they got to choose between one or the other. And then if they want to go get food, these store shelves are empty. What do you think that's going to do? Lead to people fighting each other for whatever's left in these stores, and then eventually breaking into people's houses, putting them to death, and taking whatever they can get their hands on, which is exactly what it says in 2nd Esdras chapter 15, verse 19. A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword. And what's the modern day sword? The gun. But people in that day are going to be using knives, sticks, bats, clubs, chains, Molotov cocktails, hammers, anything they can get their hands on. But shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of what? Bread, food shortages, famines, and for great tribulation. So point blank period. It's going to get to the point to where people are going to start breaking into each other's houses and forcefully taking their shit because the store shelves are empty and it's just complete chaos and pandemonium out here. But now I'm going to jump to 2nd Esdras chapter 16. I'm going to start at 17. Woe is me, woe is me. Who will deliver me in those days? And this was the prophet Esdras speaking when he saw these visions thousands of years ago. He knew, because reincarnation is biblical, he knew he would be back in these days. And he said, woe is me, woe is me, who's going to deliver me in those days? Because they were just that bad. A lot of these visions were so horrific that it says in the scriptures that the prophets threw up and felt sick because of seeing them. But who's going to deliver us in that day? Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. And he's only going to deliver the elect. The elect of you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans who are the children of Israel, as well as the Israelite foreigners who look like these heathen nations, who are diligently doing whatever you can to stay in the good graces of your power so you can be saved, delivered from these calamities of Jacob's trouble, which are quickly coming our way. The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, the war in Ukraine, China versus Taiwan, Israel versus Iran, World War III, nuclear war, and the powers shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Behold, it mentions famine again, and plague, these different pestilences out here, which are also going to kill off a lot of people. Tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment, scourges for correction, scourges for punishment, scourges for judgment. All these things are going to take place to judge you people for all the wickedness you've been committing. The Most High is about to kill off many people. It's going to be the greatest loss of life in all of human history. It says in Daniel chapter 12 that this is going to be a time like no other. Worse than the days of Noah with the flood, worse than World War I, World War II, the transatlantic slave trade, 70 AD, any horrific thing you can think about. But for all these things, they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. Here you have the prophets out here, chiefly through GMS or Great Millstone, as well as the brothers that come in the spirit of GMS, out on the highways and byways preaching this word, as well as putting up these video epistles, prophesying of these terrible times to come. But still, the majority of people out here, and we're really only concerned with you Israelites, want to scoff at the word and make a joke of things and play and think that everything's going to go back to normal. A perfect example was earlier, was that Spick and his Edomite girlfriend, little teenagers walking by laughing and giggling, I guess, at the garment, but hey, not taking heed to the words. But the Most High marked them. The Most High has marked everybody that's walked by and heard me prophesying these words. So hey, playtime's coming to an end real soon again, and those that laugh now shall weep and cry later. Behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon the earth that they shall think themselves to be in good case. Things still being relatively affordable, which, as we can see with inflation, which hyperinflation is coming, is going to come to an end. And with the Fed raising interest rates, that's actually increased the value of the dollar, giving it some more purchasing power. So things may seem a little bit cheaper for a little bit longer, but eventually, the dollar's going to bottom out. And when that hyperinflation hits, things are going to be completely unaffordable. Just think about the Weimar Republic in Germany, where people needed 100 marks, or whatever the German currency was called, 100 marks to buy a loaf of bread. You literally had people walking around in wheelbarrows filled with German marks to try to buy things, but they couldn't. And then with the value of the dollar increasing, that affects a lot of these other economies across the planet as well, because they have to raise interest rates themselves to try to keep up with the dollar, which they're in a bad economic case. So what would that further cause? People furthering away from their reliance on the US dollar and turning to trade in their own currencies using gold and silver, or what? What would be the perfect thing to go to? A CBDC, a central bank digital currency. Behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon the earth that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow upon the earth, sword, famine, mentioned again for a third time, and great confusion. For many of them that dwell upon the earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. And you may not starve to death out here, but you may get killed in a racial skirmish, a race war. You may get killed during the second Civil War, which is coming to the United States of America. Get killed by one of these NATO, FEMA, or mercenary troops patrolling the streets of America. You get sent to a concentration camp, tortured to death. You get drafted to go fight in World War III, which we're already seeing Russians getting drafted to go fight in the war in Ukraine. Or ultimately, you get burned up by these nuclear missiles when they get shot to the ends of the earth. And the dead shall be cast out as dung or shit. There's going to be so much death in that day that people aren't going to give a second thought to all these dead people, as they don't give a second thought to that turd that they flushed down the toilet. And there shall be no man to comfort them, for the city shall be wasted, and for the cities shall be for the earth shall be wasted, and the cities shall be cast down. There shall be no man left to till the earth and to sow it. The trees shall give fruit, and who shall gather them? The grapes shall ripen, and who shall tread them? For all places shall be desolate of men, so that one man shall desire to see another, and to hear his voice. For of a city there shall be 10 left, 2 of the field, which shall hide themselves in the thick groves and in the clefts of the rock. There's going to be so much death and destruction out here that the population is going to go down dramatically, and people are just going to be desperate to see another person. And in the midst of people hiding and trying to find somebody else, you're going to have other people hunting and fighting them, people fighting each other to get whatever resources are left. Again, a man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall spoil their houses with the sword due to the lack of bread and for great tribulation. As in an orchard of olives, upon every tree there are left 3 or 4 olives, or as when a vineyard is gathered, there are left some clusters of them that diligently seek through the vineyard. Even so, in those days, these days we're quickly coming into, there shall be 3 or 4 left by them that search their houses with the sword. People fighting, killing each other to get their hands on whatever's left. And cannibalism is also going to come back in a big way during these times of great famines and tribulations from Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. And so that's it with this lesson. And with this lesson, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified, as we can clearly see our salvation is nearer than when we believe. So now more than ever, we should be doing everything we can to stay in the good graces of our power, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, so we can have that protective hedge over us and be saved from these calamities of Jacob's trouble, which are quickly coming our way. So as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Abad Babal, Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala. Till next time, Shalom.